where we try to answer the question, what to expect during the actual audit. My name is Isabelle Jaudoin. I am an account executive here at StreamScan. And for over 2.5 years now, I have been helping organizations connect with our CMMC experts to help them on their compliance journey. Next. I am joined today by two CMMC experts, Christopher Augoustis, CMMC registered practitioner here at StreamScan, as well as Tom Tollerton, our CMMC Certified Assessor, a C3PAO, at Forvis Mazars. Thank you both for joining us here today. First, let's begin with more proper introductions. Chris and Tom, could you share a bit more about your background and experience? Let's start with Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris. So I'm a CMMC RP here at StreamScan. I've been here for 2 years working with multiple companies. I think we're almost at 30 companies now that we've helped from the beginning to the end of this process. And we've passed a few clients already with Tom and his team through their level 2 assessments.
Absolutely. And I'm Tom Tollerton. As Isabelle mentioned, I'm a CMMC lead certified assessor and was an original provisional assessor. I'm with Forvis Mazars, or Forvis Mazars, the 6th authorized C3PAO, based in the United States, but we work internationally. So certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great. Again, thank you both. Next. So today's agenda is as follows. We'll do a quick recap about what is CMMC and why it matters to your business. Then we'll jump into how to prepare for the CMMC audit with Chris. After that, we'll chat with Tom about what documentation and evidence is required for the audit and what to expect during the actual audit. Then we'll discuss what the common pitfalls are and how to avoid them, as well as timeline and cost for both. Please write any questions that you may have in the chat, and then we'll try to get to all of them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A period. And in any case, we are always available to answer your questions after the webinar. We will provide contact information for both StreamScan and Forvis Mazars. Next. First, a quick word about StreamScan for those who do not know us. We are a Canadian cybersecurity company that has been in operation since 2011. Our mission is to protect manufacturing companies, as well as those operating in the aerospace and defense sector, against cyber attacks. We are experts in network monitoring and incident response. We also provide support to help organizations achieve certain compliance frameworks, such as NIST 800-171, CMMC, and even the new Canadian framework, CP/CSE. And we are one of the few Canadian organizations authorized as RPO, or Registered Provider Organization, on CyberAB website, by CyberAB, to assist companies in their CMMC compliance. Next. I'm also very pleased to inform you that StreamScan is now CMMC Level 2 certified. As of now, there are only a total of 24 MSPs and MSSPs that are CMMC Level 2 certified on the planet, and it is my understanding that we are the first one in Canada. This audit covers our entire organization and demonstrates our commitment to the highest standards in terms of data protection. Next. Okay, so here's a quick reminder of what CMMC is. CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, is a framework developed by the U.S. Department of Defense. Its main objective is to ensure that organizations handling controlled unclassified information, or CUI, follow proper cybersecurity practices. It includes 3 levels of maturity, with level 2 being the main requirement for most suppliers. It is based on NIST 800-171 revision 2, but unlike NIST, it does require formal certification by a third party to demonstrate compliance. Now, why does this matter to your business? Well, CMMC compliance is increasingly a contract requirement. Without it, companies risk losing opportunities with US defense contractors and subcontractors. With it, you gain access to more opportunities and more contracts. And it also demonstrates to customers and partners that your company takes cybersecurity seriously. It helps build trust and it protects your company's reputation. And let's face it, in today's world, cybersecurity is no longer a luxury, it is a necessity. Next. All right. Now let's jump in with Christopher. How does one prepare for CMMC compliance and eventually the audit? Chris, can you walk us through?
Yeah, sorry. So here, first thing, the most important is we start with the gap analysis. We want to see where you are today. How close are you or how far are you away from, their compliance journey. So we just want to make sure, do you have any gaps in your technologies, things that are going to take a really long time to put in place? Do you not have Active Directory? That could take some time to put in place. So we just want to know firsthand right away, what is going to take a long time to get in place before we jump into the scoping part. So once we finish the gap analysis, we will jump right into the scope. We want to see what's going to be in scope, what's out of scope. Do you have any MSPs, MSSPs that will be in the scope of the project? Because we need to get them engaged early. There are some companies out there that do not want to engage in CMMC. That is a business decision that they've made, and it's too much work for them on their side to prepare and be responsible for losing a certification if they fall out of compliance. So we just want to make sure that everybody that's in your scope knows and understands what is happening, what's going to happen in the next 12 months, maybe 18 months leading up to the certification, how much time they're going to have to put in. So these are all the things that we want to make sure that they know right at the beginning of this process, because if you need to make a change, it could take several months and it could delay your process. If we get close to the end and you're almost ready for certification, and then your MSP turns around and says, yeah, you know what, we don't really want to do this anymore, you're going to have to restart that whole process with a new person. So once we get all that done, we'll start, drafting policies, procedures, get your system security plan done, start closing things off of your plan of action, going through all the steps required to pass the certification, and then getting close to the end. We don't usually wait right to the end. We try to kind of get to about 80%, and then we'll contact Forvis Mazars to kind of get an idea of when the next certification, the next time that you can get certified, so that we can kind of plan backwards from there, because there is now a wait to get certified. So you can't call up Tom and say, hey, we want to get certified next week. It'll never happen.
Yeah, if I could just interject there, to be clear, I mean, there are 80 C3PAOs right now. DoD continues to number with newly accredited C3PAOs, but frankly, the bottleneck is real, just given the volume and number of companies that are going to need to go through this. So it's not just our firm; it's virtually all C3PAOs. I mean, I'm sure there is some availability here this year, but my recommendation here, if I'm interjecting, Chris, sorry, but I would just say immediately start to engage somebody now to start talking about timeline and make sure you get scheduled.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been starting to do. Is even clients that are starting out right after the gap will reach out and kind of say, we want to get certified in April next year. Just kind of to hold that spot for us, because we know that there's a long wait, and the longer we wait, the more the more the wait times are going to go up.
So I've got a few questions for you here, Chris.
Yeah.
Is this something organizations can realistically do on their own? At what point do you recommend bringing in external help, and for which part of the process?
Yeah, so it is something that they can do alone. It's not something that you absolutely require an RPO to come in and do it for you and to help you. It can definitely be done on your own if you have qualified people internally to do it. The mistakes that we've seen in the past was companies that want to do it by themselves. It's a large cost for them, so they try to keep everything internal, and they'll work 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months on this on their own, and then they'll come see us right at the end and say, hey, we're close. We're about maybe 100 or 105 SPRS score. I think we're pretty close. Like, let's start talking. Let's kind of see what we've missed, and we realize that they're nowhere near ready. So now they've wasted almost a year of internal time and resources to kind of go in the wrong direction. So we do recommend that you get in early with an RPO, because we know exactly what needs to get done. We've gone through this process here at StreamScan over 30 times. We've gone through a few certifications as well. So we know exactly what the auditors are looking for, what we need to prepare, and give you a realistic timeline of when this is all going to get done. You do not want to start wasting a year of time to prepare for the wrong thing.
Okay. Couple questions here regarding the importance of a CUI flowchart. Can you walk us through how an organization should approach building one? And also, what's your recommendation for hosting CUI data? Should it be kept on a local server or in the cloud? What's the better option?
Yeah, so here there's two ways we go about it. If you already have CUI and you've been told that you have CUI, you need to find every piece of CUI and see where it's touching, because that is your scope, right? So you're not going to start changing the way you work. You're just going to enclose the CUI in a bubble and say, this is what it's going to touch, and this is how we work. Now, once you get that done, you want to see, where do you get it? Who do you get it from? So who are your suppliers? Are these big prime contractors are sending it? How are they sending it? Is it by mail? Is it by secure portal? Is it by email? You want to make sure you have that down. Then when it's in your system, where does it go? Who can access it? Which system does it touch? Where are the backups stored? So all that stuff, the internal security part, you need to figure out on your own, which is the longest part of this process. And then after that is kind of the back end of it, whereas do you send it out? Are you sending it to a subcontractor to finish the job? How are you doing that? Are you doing it by secure portal? Are you doing it by email? Are you doing it by regular mail, by courier? You have to decide how you're going to do that, or how it's done right now. And then you can make changes to your scope as you see fit. If you think that there's some things that are way too complicated to secure, we can remove things from the scope and change the way you work. But we try not to change the day-to-day operations too much, because this is already a huge change for the business. So that's if you already have CUI. If you don't have CUI, you're building a secure environment to host the CUI in the future. And that's how you will determine how we want to work in the future. This is what we want to do. We want to put all the CUIs on this server. We want to have only these people coming in and accessing CUI. Are we going to be able to print CUI? Do we want to print CUI in the future? Because these are all things that you need to take into consideration, because once you pass that certification, you cannot change your scope. You cannot start adding, oh, we're going to add VPN. Oh, we're going to start printing, because the auditors haven't checked for these controls. So when you did your certification, they were non-applicable to you. And now when you try to enter that into your scope, you need a recertification. So you need to also plan for the future business cases that you will have. So those are the two ways that we do with the CUI flow.
Do you find that sometimes some of the organizations have difficulties identifying what CUIs are and where they are within the organization? Is this something you run into?
Yeah, it's the question we get asked the most is, what does a CUI even look like? For many years, they're not tagged. This is a CUI. They're not tagged the right way. Even now, some contracts that are out now, they're not tagged CUI. So it's hard for a company to come in and look at a document and be like, is this CUI? You're not even sure because you don't have the full picture, right? If you're building, fighter jets, you're not going to get the full picture of the fighter jet. You're going to get a tiny document of one specific piece, but you don't know what it goes to, and you could be working with a company, like General Dynamics or something like that, where it might not even go on military planes. We don't know, right? We're not told this information. So it's the hardest thing is to identify CUI already in your environment. But it will get easier as it keeps moving forward and the new contracts come out and the new rules come out. We will be told exactly which document is CUI and what needs to be protected. So it will get easier, but it is the question we get the most often.
And I guess you have ways and methods to help companies identify their CUIs correctly.
Yeah, so we do trainings with companies. We'll take an hour meeting. Sometimes we do two-hour meetings depending on who needs to be there with availabilities. And we'll tell you everything about CUI, what it looks like, how you should protect it, how you should be marking them, what you should be looking out for, who you should be contacting, to kind of start getting all the CUIs in the right place, because it's the document the most important right now that you need to protect. So you need to find them all and label them all properly, and then start protecting them the way that it was supposed to be from now 2018.
Okay. You mean with NIST 800-171? Yes, correct.
Yes.
What about an enclave? When is it a smart choice to go that route?
Yeah, so it's a business case. So it really depends on the company. Like, we worked with companies that are 30 people and they wanted to do an enclave because there was only 7 people, working with CUI, and that's going to touch CUI. And people are working with bring your own devices and things like that, where it complicates a lot of the controls that we have to put in place to make sure that you're ready for CMMC. So it really is a business case. If you do full enterprise, if you're 1,000 people enterprise, you have to do background checks on 1,000 people. You have to make sure that 1,000 people, you have to manage BitLocker keys for 1,000 laptops. It starts to get very, very difficult to do internally for many companies. Whereas if you see that out of the 1,000 people, you're maybe 50 people that are touching CUI, you say, well, maybe it's easier we just do it with 50.
I hear the rule of thumb is about 15% or less. You do an enclave. Is that about it?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense to do it that way. It really depends on the company and how they want to go about and what the future plans are for the company. CMMC is not just something you need to do for contracts. It's something you need to do to plan for your future business. If you think that it's worth, spending that extra money to, do a full enterprise certification, go ahead and do it. It's not that it's extra work on our side. The controls are the same. It's just more work to make sure that everything is in place properly and that you're following this, and everybody has to do the same certification. Everybody has to do the same trainings. That's just the hardest part, is getting everybody on board. Whereas before you would have maybe 50, and now you have 1,000 people to take care of.
Now, what additional advice would you give organizations as they begin their compliance journey?
Start as early as possible. That's the most important. These projects can take a year, right? And CMMC has been out now for many years, but in the last year and a half, they've been really pushing it. Within the next few months, we're told This is supposed to kind of go through final rule and start appearing on contracts in the near future. And once they're on contracts, you can't bid on them, right? You can't purchase that contract until you have your certification. And now everybody is going to do the same thing, where they're going to start running all at the same time, saying, hey, I need, we're going to lose out on business because we're not prepared. So start early. Start in the right direction is the most important. You don't want to start going backwards. Reach out to an RPO, talk to somebody, make sure you're on the right path before even starting out. See if this is something your company even wants to do is another thing, because we've seen it in the past where, you're getting funding from here and there, and they're like, oh, we're just going to do it. And then, halfway through we realize, yeah, maybe we don't want to work with the defense sector. And now you've wasted 6-8 months of time kind of, going for a certification that you're never going to use.
Okay. So now, in terms of getting ready, the organization did the gap analysis, defined the scope and the CUI flow chart, and they developed all the documents and policies and fixed on all the gaps before scheduling the audit. Now, now they're ready for the audit. Do you recommend doing a pre-audit, and if so, why?
Yes, 100%. It is probably the most important step of this is to do that pre-assessment or the pre-audit, because from when you finish doing all your work to when you pass the audit, there could be things that fall through the cracks, right? This is new for many people. The procedures are new. The way, your workflow is new, and there will be mistakes. Now, we don't want to get to an audit and realize in the audit that we're doing something wrong. That the policy is saying we're doing it one way and we've interpreted it the wrong way. So the pre-audit, basically, we come in and we act as auditors, and we go through every single assessment objective. We go through your SSP, your plan of actions, your procedures, your policies, and find little details that we've missed, that are, hey, we've set, account lockouts to 10, but in your group policies, they're set at 8. Well, something wrong there, right? And those are little things that we don't really necessarily think of. And that could be something where, it's the difference between passing an audit and failing an audit.
What about during the actual audit process? Should they be supported?
Yes. So again, during the audit, have somebody in there that's gone through an audit before. We recommend that we're there. We've done it with our clients in the past. That we're there with the Forvis Mazars team. Just having us there sometimes is a confidence booster for a lot of companies. They know that if there's a mistake, or we say something wrong, that we're there to back them up. We know their system. We've been working with them for a year now. We understand how their system works and what they're doing. And sometimes, the controls are still not clear for many companies. So when they get asked a question by an auditor, you might answer and say the wrong thing, when in reality, you're actually doing the right thing and you just said it wrong. And the auditor will interpret it the way that you said it, which is not the right way. And that could be, again, a reason to fail the audit.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Next. Now let's talk about how to choose a CMMC auditor. To pick the right partner, you can go on CyberAB website. In the section Marketplace, you click on C3PAO and you will see the list of all of the C3PAOs. As Tom mentioned earlier, there are currently 79 authorized C3PAOs. And in the defense industrial basis, there are over 300,000 companies, and it's estimated that about 80,000 of them will need a full third-party CMMC Level 2 assessment over the next 2 to 3 years. If you do the math, that's a lot of assessments and not a lot of C3PAOs. And my recommendation, as Tom said and Chris said, reserve your spot as soon as you know you'll be ready. I believe right now there is already a 5-month delay if you want to do an audit, and it's only going to get worse. So reserve your spot early. Next. All right, now let's talk with Tom about the actual audit. Tom, can you tell us what documents are required for the audit, before the audit, Can you take us through the list?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. This list here, the bulleted list, is a kind of a great summary of what we would expect to see at some point during an assessment as the assessing C3PAO. The System Security Plan, the SSP as it's called, is the crux document. It effectively, it doesn't have to be a super long document. Really what it needs to be is an explanation of how you implement processes and technologies to meet all of the requirements of the NIST 800-171 framework. And so it can be narrative based. It doesn't need to be 1,000 pages of standards and guidelines and procedures and things. It really just kind of is for us up front to understand what your environment looks like from a control standpoint. And so just to kind of jump ahead maybe in what the assessment looks like, that's the initial document we'll request when we start an assessment during the readiness review. We'll take a look at that. And then any supporting policies and procedures related to the other control families that are listed here, things like training policies and procedures. The incident response plan is often a separate document that we'll want to take a look at. The network and data flow diagram listed here, we'll want to see how CUI flows in and out of an environment, just to get an understanding of the scope and how you define your boundaries and your control environment. So those are requested up front. And then, of course, you'll need to have done things like have your asset inventory ready, have a risk assessment performed, not just the risk assessment policy for performing it, but actually have conducted one, and then be able to demonstrate, how you calculated and address risk within the CUI environment specifically. And then I'll comment too on the plan of action and milestones, the POA&Ms as they're called. Those are commonly used in the event that an assessment does not result in a perfect score. So unlike where we were previously before CMMC and using NIST 800-171, you were allowed to have POA&Ms effectively for any control in the 800-171 framework and then leave them alive indefinitely. They're effectively plans on how you would remediate a deficiency on a particular control. In CMMC, you can't rely upon them completely or indefinitely. So there are certain controls during an assessment that can fail and result in a conditional level 2 certification, but you have to put together a plan of action and milestones on how you remediate that deficiency within 180 days. And then your C3PAO would come in sometime during that 180-day window to validate that it's been remediated before they can issue the final certificate of status, assuming that everything is finally met and there's a perfect score of 110. So that's where plan of action and milestones are important. You can enter an assessment, knowing that it might fail, but I wouldn't recommend sort of coming into an assessment with a plan of action and milestones document. I would want to get that remediated with Chris or with your consultant in advance of the assessment. If you need to have one that results during the assessment, that happens, but would certainly recommend that those get remediated in advance.
How much of the audit depends on documentations versus demonstrating the actual practice?
That's a great question. And right now, different C3PAOs are conducting assessments a little bit differently. There isn't standardized guidance on sampling or what evidence needs to be collected up front, really, other than having the system security plan for the readiness review and supporting documentation. Some C3PAOs ask for a lot of this sort of evidence in screenshot format or system export format in advance. And that's customary in some other frameworks like FedRAMP and ISO. You'd provide a huge body of evidence up front before the assessment even started. Other C3PAOs, and frankly, the Department of Defense, when they were conducting these assessments, don't necessarily ask for a lot of evidence right up front. They want to walk through it. And so, and to be transparent, that's sort of our approach right now. Forvis Mazars follows the DIPCAC methodology, the DoD methodology, to really just request your policy, procedure, and system security plan up front, and then have the assessment week scheduled where we will walk through the implementation. So you've shown us your system security plan. Now show us in production that everything is actually there. And so we will pull up screens. We'll do shoulder surfing and just walk through the implementation with individual control owners within the organization, or as Chris mentioned, really with a partner consultant. Sometimes they're involved in these assessments as well. We'll work with them to validate, and then we'll just take notes and we'll mark met or not met, or not applicable for each individual requirement. So to answer your question, Isabel, sometimes it depends, and that's something that you really want to ask your C3PAO and understand up front. Okay, what is it that you want up front? How are you going to conduct the assessment? Because you'll want to make sure you're prepared for whatever the approach and methodology is.
Talking about approach and methodology, next, can you actually walk us through step by step what happens during the audit?
Absolutely. And I could say pretty consistently across the C3PAO community that I've seen, these assessments really take roughly 6 to 8 weeks, kind of end to end. And so where it starts is with that initial planning and scoping call. So before we even get started, we would have a conversation to make sure we fully understand the environment, and we'll ask you to pull up the network diagram and show us, all right, where are your boundaries within your environment for handling CUI? And then from there, assuming that we've contracted for the assessment, we would ask for your system security plan and those documents that we talked about a second ago. And we would have the readiness review period, which is sort of a phase 1 and a gate before the actual assessment is to occur. And that's time for us. That's not really heavy on the contractor side, but that's when we look through your system security plan. We might ask some clarifying questions during that period, just make sure we understand everything, but just kind of want to make sure that everything is designed in the environment to meet 800-171 before we begin the actual assessment. And so assuming that takes 2 to 3 weeks, we would have scheduled the assessment week in advance as well with the contractor team to make sure it works for everybody. We certainly want to be respectful of everybody's time. And then we conduct our assessment meetings based upon control family. So we would set aside time to talk about access control and incident response and risk management and physical security, if that's in play for the assessment. And so we spend, it's a fairly intense week, but we work around calendars, and we do want to get it done fairly quickly. So we don't want it to drag out. There are certain guides in the certification assessment process that we have to have an in-brief and an out-brief, and we have to keep it fairly concise. And the environment cannot change during that assessment week. That's an important note to mention as well. So if there is a deficiency, you can't fix a problem in the environment during the assessment. It would have to be POA&M'd or have a plan of action, a milestone put in place. From there, once that assessment week is completed, there would be an out brief, and assuming a 110 score, we would work toward the certificate process. We have a QA process that we have to go through. We have to work within EMAS, the Enterprise Mission Assurance Support System, which is DoD's documentation system. So we have to get everything up there. There's artifact hashing that has to happen. There's retention requirements for artifacts looked at during the assessment, and then we would work toward it takes about three weeks or so after the final out brief to issue the final deliverable. So end to end 6 to 8 weeks. I'll pause there. There's a couple more things I was going to comment here, but anything, Isabel, you want to dig into on the assessment process?
Well, one question comes to mind that we are often asked: are audits usually done remotely, on site, or a mix of both?
That's a great question. Right now, they're typically a mix of both. And so we do have flexibility to conduct it completely virtually when the environment is cloud-based. The CUI environment is cloud-based. There is effectively no physical or printed CUI, or there's no mobile media. There are no laptops that store it on site at your organization. We don't need to come in and validate the physical security controls. What the CAP document, the certification assessment process document, does require is that we validate the physical security controls. So we do come on site if the physical security controls have to be looked at. That typically takes half a day in a small environment, or if there are multiple sites, it can take a little bit longer. We can sample those, but we might have to sample a couple of them, kind of depending upon the size of the organization. But obviously, ideally, a virtual assessment is preferred in most instances, but it's usually a mix of both.
What kind of evidence do you expect to see beyond policies? Screenshots, logs, interviews?
Yeah, we'll typically look at those when we're on site. We have done some assessments where the desired approach is really to pull evidence, so to speak. There might be your organization might have a GRC platform where you store evidence. You can collect it easily, quickly, and store it based upon control family. There are a lot of tools out there that use that. And so we're happy to kind of work within that methodology as well. We obviously want to see that the evidence is current, accurate, and applied to the system that it's claimed to be. So there's certain verifications that we would want to do. But again, back to the DIBCAC methodology, the Department of Defense methodology, typically we'll take a look at it. We'll want to see it live during the actual assessment.
What are some of the most common gaps that you uncover during the readiness assessment?
During a readiness assessment or during an actual assessment?
During the assessment, sorry. During the actual assessment.
Yeah, the actual assessment. Sure, absolutely. There are a number of things that we'll see. Very often it's documentation based. There's something that's missing from a documentation standpoint, as Chris and you have both alluded to. That's really important to get right up front. Fortunately, there is the opportunity in the CAP for contractors to fix documentation during the assessment, during what's called a limited deficiency correction. If things in the SSP or policy don't exactly line up with what's happening in production, then the documentation can be updated, not vice versa, but the documentation can be updated. So there is that advantage. But there are also some small other things that just sort of get overlooked. So incident response testing, making sure that you've tested your incident response plan. You don't just have one, you've actually tested it. We've seen a POA&M have to go into place around that. If you have vulnerability scanning tools as part of your vulnerability management program, making sure that those are operating as designed and in place. We've seen POA&Ms have to be put in place around that. And then just clear clear interface, I guess I'll say, with your MSP and your third-party service providers. Chris talked a good bit about this, just making sure that they're on board, that they know what their responsibilities are. We've encountered a couple of assessments where they weren't prepared, they weren't really taking it seriously, recognizing that the week was going to be intense and that they needed to be participatory to it. It caused some stumbles and some delays there. Those, I would say, those are probably the most common things that we see.
Okay, so the MSSPs, they're in scope. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, they can be, and we haven't really talked about the certification process for third parties, ESPs versus MSPs versus CSPs, cloud service providers. But cloud service providers all have to be FedRAMP moderate certified or equivalent in order to store CUI on your behalf in your environment. So that's important. But for MSPs, there are really two routes to go. There is really what StreamScan has done, which is build their services and a shared responsibility matrix, and then have their operations certified as well, so that a C3PAO can then rely upon that for their own for a contractor certification that they're working with. That's I think the ultimate intention of CMMC is that for MSP to use a certified MSP like that. The other approach is the MSP or MSSP would be included in the scope of a contractor's assessment. So they would have to be assessed each time a contractor client of theirs was going to be assessed. They would get pulled in for whatever services they're providing to the contractor and in their CUI environment. So, and that could get burdensome ultimately. So ultimately the approach really should be for MSPs to be certified as well.
Now, you talked about POA&Ms. What's acceptable and what's not?
That's a great question. So there is a scoring methodology that goes into every CMMC assessment, and each control family is assigned a particular score, 1, 3, or 5, and that's a priority-based system. And those that are considered the most critical are not permitted to have POA&Ms. And I could we could pull up the list and go through it. It's kind of an odd scoring methodology because it's out of 110 instead of out of 100. But things like not having a system security plan, which is a requirement, you obviously cannot POA&M that. You have to have a system security plan. There's an encryption requirement that cannot be POA&M'd. You do have to have perimeter defense. So they're basic blocking and tackling that cannot be POA&M'd. But then the other lower score, lower critical items can be POA&M'd as well.
Okay. Next. Can you tell us about some of the most common pitfalls or mistakes that companies make during the audit? Can you go through the list and what's the number
Absolutely.
one thing that, yes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the outdated or incomplete documentation, we talked a little bit about that. You can fix some of that during the assessment, but it is a common problem. You do need to have everything accurate and approved. We also see incomplete documentation. We sometimes see templates used. There are a lot of consultants that are sort of selling CMMC compliant templates, but they're not, they get purchased and used by contractors, but they don't really reflect reality completely. So over reliance upon templates is certainly a risk coming into an assessment. And that relates to that second bullet, the undocumented controls, just having alignment between reality, the reality in production, and then your documentation is critical. The over-reliance upon POA&Ms, back to the idea of that scoring methodology, you have to have, there are certain POA&Ms, or excuse me, certain requirements that can have POA&Ms, but you also cannot over-rely upon them because you have to have a score of % or higher during the assessment to even rely upon them. So if we got through an assessment with a contractor and they had all of these deficiencies, but the score was 78% or anything lower than 80, those POA&Ms would not matter. It's an automatic failed assessment. So you can't rely too hard on POA&Ms. You can have a couple of them, but you can't rely upon them too hard. We touched on this just a second ago, assuming your service providers will cover everything. There really should be a shared responsibility matrix document for any MSP, whether certified or not, when it comes to your assessment. So it's clear, so that when a C3PAO comes in, they understand, okay, I'm going to need to look at this environment, talk to these people for these certain controls, and then I'm going to have to talk to these people over in the MSP for some of these controls. So making sure there's clarity on who owns what, because if you get into an assessment and no one seems to own a particular control, that's not going to be a good thing. And then the lack of evidence for operational controls. We've gotten into assessments where project managers have sort of been leading the assessments for the contractor side, and they have been unable to demonstrate the operation of the control, which has led to either a POA&M or a failed assessment. You've got to make sure that you're ready. Chris talked about this. Make sure you're ready going into an assessment to get the assessment done in short order. So making sure that there's evidence available, you know where it is. Even if you don't pull screenshots, you know how to quickly pull it up, quickly gather it during the assessment so you can share it with the assessor. And then in that second to last bullet, the SSP doesn't match actual practices. We've talked a little bit about that. Not a good look either way. Whether you can fix it or not, you do want to make sure that you're doing what you say you're doing in your SSP. And then diagrams and screenshots don't give an assessor, accurate documentation, because sometimes we'll take a look at some of those screenshots up front early in an assessment. We'll take a look at the implementation, and then we'll say, well, let's see it live, pull it up for us now during the assessment, and it's not reality. That's ultimately going to result in a fail, at least for that particular control.
For Canadian companies, maybe Tom or Chris may have an answer to this. Are there any additional considerations that they should keep in mind when preparing?
Yeah, Chris, you want to jump in, or do you want me to take it?
Yeah, you can take it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for Canadian companies in particular, there are a number that are paying attention to CMMC, which I think is a good thing. Ultimately, the entire defense industrial base in across the world for the U.S. Department of Defense will have to have this certification. There's no reciprocity with any other country as of yet, or with any other certification program. So this will be a requirement if you're in Brazil or Europe or Canada, there will be a need for the certification if you are party to a US DoD contract. Now, I will say the cyber accreditation body, the Cyber AB that manages the ecosystem of assessors, is actively looking to to start to get assessors in other countries, in Canada, in Europe, and in everywhere the department does business, just so we can start to kind of speed up the rollout and implementation of this. But as of right now, we're not there yet. So we only have US-based C3PAOs. And I think we do have a couple of international CCAs, the individual assessors, but they're all aligned right now. So just, I say all that to be thinking about the bottleneck and the constraint of the rollout here, that you'll have to deal with a US-based company, at least right now, for these early assessments.
Now, in Canada, some of the companies also will need to comply to the Canadian framework, CPCSC, and that one is based on NIST 800-171 revision 3, as CMMC is based on revision 2. Which framework should they use? Should they still use revision 2? Could they use revision 3 right away? What's your...
Yes. There's a little bit of a conflict there, which is interesting, and we do get this question quite often. For contractors that we work with that are ready for certification, we work with revision 2, and we recommend, frankly, right now, everybody work toward revision 2. Now, if you are early enough in your process and our readiness process, so to speak, it does make sense to start conducting your gap assessments against Rev 2 and the additional revision 3 requirements as well. Just because of obviously the Canadian framework, and because ultimately DoD will be adopting Rev 2. We hear between 12 and 18 months from now, they'll have some supplemental rulemaking that will integrate revision 3 into the DFARS, into the acquisition rules. So it certainly start thinking about it from a gap assessment standpoint. But if you're looking to be assessed within the next 3 to 6 months, focus on the revision 2.
So if they are assessed within the next 3 to 6 months, they pass, they have their certification, and then CMMC changes to be based on revision 3, what then? What happens then? Are they okay for 3 years?
Yeah, we'll have to see in the official rules. I mean, our understanding and frankly, my assumption, which is not, not worth too much, is that they will be any revision 2 certificate or certificate issued based upon revision 2 will be honored for that 3-year certification life cycle. We don't have capacity in the ecosystem to support reassessments of that volume to get to revision 3. It would not be well received by the DIB to have to all of a sudden go through another assessment. That would really upset, I think, the DIB. Plus, we need a ramp up period. There are some significant changes in revision 3. So companies that have been working with revision 2 are going to need some time to implement revision 3. So I would anticipate that you'll be, quote unquote, safe if you have a revision 2 certificate in that 3-year life cycle, for that 3-year life cycle.
Anything else we haven't covered that you think it's important that we talk about for companies to prepare for their audit?
Well, I mean, it's, we've been talking about this for a very long time. The CMMC has been at least in the minds of DoD leadership for 5 years, and I know there's been some hesitancy in the DIB, in the defense industrial base, and with companies to say, well, we've been talking about it, and it hasn't arrived. Well, it's here. So I can't, emphasize enough really what Chris said earlier. Now is the time to prepare. Don't wait. This can take a year to get ready, or longer potentially, kind of depending upon the organizational structure, if you're starting from ground zero. So my recommendation is work with a consultant that has worked with NIST 800-171, that understands the certification process, that has gone through it. And then, yes, start to interview C3PAOs, start to have conversations and work toward that certificate. I think moving quicker is an advantage than sitting back and waiting and saying, all right, we'll wait till we bid on a contract, or we'll wait till the rule is final. I think now is the time to get moving.
All right. Next. In terms of timelines and costs, I think we've already covered the timeline part. The preparation phase, as mentioned by Chris, can take from 12 to 18 months, depending on the maturity level. The audit part, Tom mentioned, takes between 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the size, I'm assuming. That includes planning, fieldwork, and report. In terms of cost, well, this will vary depending on several factors. That includes the size of the organization, the scope, the current level of cybersecurity maturity and compliance. If an organization is already compliant to NIST 800-171, but just requires some documentation, it will go much faster than if a company starts from scratch and has nothing in place. It also depends on the resources available internally for preparation, because it does take time, and it's going to put a lot of strain on the team, the IT team. So it does require a lot of time from the people to do the work. Here at StreamScan, as Chris said, we've supported over 30 companies so far, and we always start with a gap analysis to assess the current state, and then we can then define a clear roadmap towards compliance and audit readiness. And feel free to reach out, and we can look and discuss with you what cost may be involved in getting ready. And in terms of the audit cost, perhaps, Tom, you have some things to say about that?
Yeah, I think it also depends upon the C3PAO, frankly, and their approach too. So there are different size C3PAOs, large businesses like ours that that has a pretty robust team and a pretty robust approach. There are smaller C3PAOs as well that I believe in all quality work. I think that's really the objective. You don't want to go bargain basement shopping. I don't think that's to your benefit. But I think look for quality, look for organizations that have done the work, that have worked with other contractors in your industry. But right now we kind of see, because we see varying approaches, because we see varying size C3PAOs, there's pretty wild kind of differences in cost. So it is my counsel to kind of shop around and see what makes sense for your business. But you'll see kind of different costs, but be thorough and be diligent about meeting your C3PAOs.
Next. So the key takeaways here is start early. Most time is spent on preparing, not auditing. Choose your partners carefully for support and for certification. Bring in all key players into the process at the start, if possible. And ask questions. Don't rely on assumptions. Next. This wraps up the main part of our session. I'd like now to open the floor for questions. Feel free to type them in the chat. We'll do our best to address as many as we can. There is already a couple of questions here. One is, let me read this. I think this will be for Chris or Tom. If it says, if we are in the process of implementing fundamental core aspect of cybersecurity, such as a SIM, SOAR, dark web monitoring, change request, ITSM systems, etc., can we still obtain the CMMC certification, or all core components as listed above should be in place first?
Yeah, so I can take that. So it should all be in place first. You need to prove to the auditors that you're actually doing what you're saying you're doing in your documentation. You can write your documentation to say, hey, we're using this SIM, we're using, we're doing dark web monitoring, we're doing all that. That's fine. You can plan for the future. But once you get into that audit, it needs to be in place, and you need to be able to prove that you've been doing it. I'd say at least a couple months, I think, is the best option. At least you get used to it. It's not something new, so that when you're showing the auditors, you know exactly where to go, because sometimes new tools take time to understand. I need to go here for this, to do this, make sure all the configurations are done properly. Get them in place, get used to them, and then pass your audit is the best advice I can give.
Anything you want to add, Tom?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, you at the very least want to see it operational and in place for a certain period of time. You want to feel comfortable with presenting it during the assessment. I don't think there's any direct requirement in guidance on having how long it has to be in place and operational, but Chris is absolutely right. You want to be able to demonstrate how it works and have a little bit of evidence to prove that it's functioning as intended.
Another question here, based on your experience, what percentage of all the companies that go through the assessment pass with a perfect score?
That's a good question. I can give, well, let me back up. Matt Travis, the CEO of the cyber accreditation body, does give an update on the town halls that we just had, that he has monthly and during webinars, Tuesdays. I think it's the last Tuesday of each month, but I missed the last one, so I can't see overall from an industry standpoint what the metrics are, but I would say probably roughly 80%, 80 to 90% of ours finished with a perfect score, which is pretty good. And then there have been a couple of POA&Ms that have had to go in place. I will say that a lot of the early assessments, I think, have been successful because they've been with organizations that have invested early and want to do this and have partnered with a consulting firm and have, they wanted to make sure they're successful, they believe in it, and it's a good business advantage for them. What I'm afraid of is a year down the road, we'll start to see organizations go through these assessments because they have to, and they haven't planned out, haven't built a compliant environment. And so then we'll start to see more failed assessments or more POA&Ms that have to go into place. So that's really why Chris and I are kind of advising here to be working on it right now, getting ready so it's a successful assessment for you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I can
Chris?
just throw it in. Yeah. So on our side, it's 100%. We've gone through assessments for CMMC level 2 with Tom's team, and we've all had 100% certifications.
That's great. I think that's a good way to end this webinar here. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. And a very special thank you to our guest speakers, Chris and Tom, for sharing your expertise and your insight. It's been incredibly valuable. We hope that today's discussion helps you move forward with more clarity and confidence around the CMMC. And if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thanks again, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon.